The streets of Vienna in 1909 were not kind to the forgotten. Snow gathered in the gutters, horse-drawn trams rattled across frozen tracks, and the city's grand facades loomed over the desperate souls huddling in doorways. Among them shuffled a thin, pale young man. His coat was worn, his shoes cracked, and his eyes carried both pride and bitterness. In his satchel lay sketches of Vienna's churches and alleys, crude watercolors he tried to sell to tourists for a few coins. When the paintings did not sell, he drifted towards the soup kitchens or to the homeless shelters where the air was thick with coughs, sweat, and despair. That man was Adolf Hitler. Before the dictatorship, before the wars, before the world knew his name, he was simply another drifter lost in a city that did not care whether he lived or died. Yet from those years of hunger and humiliation grew a conviction, a poisonous belief that he would one day rise above them all. Adolf Hitler was born in 1889 in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town near the German border. His father, Alois, was a stern customs official, a man of ambition and harsh discipline. His mother, Clara, was gentle, doting, and often shielded the young Adolf from his father's temper. Their household was marked by conflict. Alois demanded obedience, yet Adolf resisted. He dreamed of being an artist, not a civil servant like his father. At school in Linz, Hitler was an average student at best. He loved drawing buildings and reading about German history, but he despised authority. When his father died in 1903, Adolf's resistance hardened. By the time his mother passed away from cancer in 1907, he was adrift. Her death devastated him, but it also severed the last tie to structure and care in his life. Hitler, barely 18, traveled to Vienna with grand ambitions. He wanted to be a painter, to study at the Academy of Fine Arts. Twice he applied, twice he was rejected. The professors dismissed his work as lacking creativity and technique. They suggested he might succeed as an architect, but without formal schooling, that door was closed. For Hitler, the rejection was more than personal. It was humiliation. He believed destiny had chosen him, yet the world refused to see it. Soon his small inheritance was gone. He drifted into men's hostels, the so-called Asyl für Obdachlose, where hundreds of desperate men slept side by side on straw mats, the stench of unwashed bodies heavy in the air. In those hostels, Hitler encountered a cross-section of Vienna's poor. Workers, unemployed veterans, immigrants. He listened to their anger, their grievances, and their prejudices. Vienna at the time was a city alive with politics. Socialists debated in cafes, nationalists rallied in beer halls, and anti-Semitic rhetoric flowed from newspapers and street agitators. The city's mayor, Karl Lueger, openly exploited racial hatred to win votes. For the young, bitter Hitler, these ideas offered both explanation and scapegoat. His personal failures, he decided, were not his fault. They were the result of enemies corrupting society. He sketched postcards by day, sold them for pennies, and spent his evenings in shelters where pamphlets and angry voices reinforced his growing convictions. He began to believe that Jews, Marxists, and cosmopolitans were not just rivals, but existential threats. When war broke out in 1914, Hitler's aimless existence finally found meaning. He volunteered for the German army, eager to serve the nation he idolized. The trenches of the Western Front were hell on earth, mud that swallowed boots, lice that infested uniforms, and artillery that shattered men in an instant. Hitler served as a dispatch runner, carrying messages between posts under constant fire. He was wounded twice, decorated for bravery, and promoted to corporal. For a man who had known only rejection, the army gave him belonging, respect, and purpose. He lived for the comradeship, the discipline, the sense that he was finally part of something greater. But in November 1918, as he recovered from a gas attack in hospital, the news came. Germany had surrendered. The empire collapsed, The Kaiser abdicated, and a republic was declared. For millions of Germans, the armistice was a shock. For Hitler, it was betrayal. He could not accept that the mighty German army had been defeated in the field. Instead, he embraced the poisonous myth spreading among veterans that Germany had been stabbed in the back by traitors at home, Jews, Marxists, and weak politicians. That lie would become the foundation of his politics. Returning to Munich after the war, Hitler found chaos. Soldiers formed councils, communists launched uprisings, and paramilitary groups patrolled the streets. The Weimar Republic, barely born, was already fragile. In 1919, while working as a military informant, Hitler attended a meeting of a small group called the German Workers' Party. It was little more than a handful of men shouting nationalist slogans in a beer hall. But when Hitler rose to speak, his words electrified the room. He spoke with fury, with conviction, with venom. The drifter had found his weapon, oratory. Within a year, the group renamed itself the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. Hitler quickly dominated it. He gave it ideology, enemies, and spectacle. He created the swastika, the salute, the uniforms. He promised not just politics, but salvation. By 1923, inspired by Mussolini's March on Rome, Hitler attempted his own coup. Surrounded by stormtroopers of the SA, he stormed into a Munich beer hall, fired a pistol into the ceiling, and declared a national revolution. But when the moment came, the police fired back. 16 Nazis were killed. Hitler fled, only to be arrested days later. It might have ended there with a failed coup and a prison sentence, but Hitler turned disaster into opportunity. At his trial, he transformed the courtroom into a stage. He thundered against Versailles, against Jews, against the November criminals. Newspapers across Germany printed his words. Instead of silencing him, the trial made him famous. He was sentenced to 5 years, but served only 9 months in relative comfort. There he dictated Mein Kampf, a book of hatred and ambition. Few took it seriously, but for Hitler it was blueprint and prophecy. After prison, Hitler realized brute force would not bring him power. He would take it legally, step by step. He rebuilt the Nazi Party with discipline. Goebbels crafted propaganda that turned Hitler into a messianic figure. The SA grew into an army of thugs, intimidating opponents and projecting strength. By 1928, the party was still small, only 12 seats in parliament. But then came the Great Depression. Millions were unemployed, hunger returned, despair spread, and into that despair stepped Hitler once again. His rallies promised work, bread, and national pride. His enemies were simple and visible. His words gave the desperate something intoxicating: hope. In 1930, the Nazis leapt to 107 seats. By July 1932, they were the largest party in Germany. Still, President Hindenburg refused to appoint Hitler as chancellor. He despised him, calling him the Bohemian Corporal. Yet conservative elites, desperate for stability, believed they could control him. On January 30th, 1933, their gamble became Germany's doom. Hitler was sworn in as chancellor. The young man who once slept in Vienna shelters, who sold sketches for pennies, who drifted hungry and humiliated, had become the ruler of Germany. His journey from homelessness to dictatorship was not just personal. It was the story of a nation's despair, of millions who sought certainty in dangerous promises. But even in 1933, Hitler's darkest chapter was still to come. His rise was only the beginning. The path ahead would lead to blood, war, and ruin. That story will continue in our next episode, The Beer Hall Putsch. This was the Gallows Archive.